Hello and welcome back to class. It's week 7 for LDR814, Transformational Leadership. Well, this week we're going to be moving out of the literature and into testing the literature. And testing, of course, is important because anybody can come up with a theory. It's only through some sort of testing or comparison to empirical evidence that we can tell whether one theory is better than another. So the literature that we're going to be looking at for this week does propose different ways of testing the different theories that we've been examining in this class. In general, leadership, like many other behavioral sciences like psychology and sociology, is tested through observation, sometimes through experimentation, but a lot of times through surveys where we get people's opinions about things through various what we call instruments, ways of gathering data. And this again is important in preparation for a dissertation because one way or another you're going to have to prove the idea that you propose as the research for your dissertation. Generally you propose a research question, you might call it a topic, but really it's a question and an answer, and then you go out and collect data to show that the answer you proposed actually makes sense. So we're going to get an introduction to that in this week's readings. The assignment will be both a discussion regarding the readings for the week and then a paper, a little bit shorter paper this time, 5 pages, where you describe and explain why you think theories should be tested. And I would like to fit this whole concept into the dissertation, which I've talked about in other classes, but it's always good to come back to it again and say, well, how does what we're doing this week relate to what I need to do to write a dissertation? Well, the dissertation model that we use here, and I think both the health science program as well as the DBA programs approach it pretty much the same way, is we use what's called a 5-chapter dissertation. The first chapter is the introduction, and the second chapter is a literature review. The third chapter is a methodology section. The fourth chapter are the statistical findings, the results of the testing that you do, and then chapter 5 is a summary where you convert everything back into English and say, so what did you actually find out and how does this relate to the literature? How are you contributing to the literature, the field? Okay, so that's where you want to end up with. The question is, how do you get there? But maybe before we talk about how to get there, we should talk a little bit about what a dissertation is not. As a advisor and chair of many dissertation committees, I get a lot of proposals, and unfortunately many of them I just have to say, no, it's not even worth considering, because what you're talking about is not what a dissertation is supposed to be. You can't simply pick an idea that you think might be interesting and decide this is what my dissertation is going to be. So, for example, a dissertation can't be a report. No matter how interesting the report might be, no matter what kind of expertise you have in the field, simply writing a report about something is not a dissertation. A dissertation is not an opinion editorial piece where you're expressing opinion or maybe expressing some other expert's opinion about something. Again, it may be fascinating, it may be accurate, but without the appropriate process, the protocol that we use for dissertations, there's no way of knowing. Dissertation is not a personal biography about how you built your company or what you think leadership is really all about. It's interesting, but if you look at the papers that we've been reading for class, you find very little about the background of the person who wrote the paper. He or she is generally not talking about their life and how their life led them to where they are with their theory. So we're not interested really in a biography, and we're also, and this again surprises people sometimes, in simply replicating or retesting an established theory. Going out and taking, for example, in leadership, transformational leadership is used all the time, I think overly used, but it's used all the time. And it's been shown through empirical testing in many different situations to have a high correlation. The transformational leaders tend to have get higher job satisfaction ratings out of their employees. Okay, it's just almost every single time. I mean, it's not 100% correlation, but it happens enough that we think, well, this is just one of the things that transformational leadership results in. So to go out and propose that you're going to study transformational leadership and its effect on job satisfaction in the elementary school population, teacher population in Nebraska, even if it turned out to be correct and it turned out to be true, you wouldn't really be adding anything new that we already don't know about. Okay, so simply going out and doing something that's been done before isn't generally an acceptable approach either. Okay, so let's talk about the dissertation process quickly. Well, I think I've shown this before, and it's available in the videos in the Start Here section of the class. But basically the process goes through collecting 2 streams of literature, synthesizing the streams, and defining the gap. That gets you to the prospectus stage. At that point, the green part of this diagram is finished. You get a panel or a committee. Then you start the proposal stage, with the purple blocks where you develop the research questions and hypotheses, design your data collection method. Okay. Then when that's finished and your committee thinks you're ready to go, you defend that, and if that's approved, your defense is approved, then you move on to start collecting the data. First you stop at the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, for approval for your particular method, and then you start collecting your data, whether it's sending out surveys or doing observations or running experiments, whatever your particular method you've chosen. You collect the data, you analyze the data, you report the findings, and then you summarize the results and conclusions. At that point, the dissertation, again, if your committee agrees, is finished, and you do a final defense, and if that's accepted, then you have a finished dissertation. Okay, so that's the process we go through. What I'm going to talk about here is what might be considered the hardest part for students to kind of grasp of exactly what do we do with the second stream of literature, how do we synthesize it, what's a gap and what's a bridge. Okay, but obviously this is where you need to get to finish your prospectus. So first of all, why do we use 2 streams of literature? Why don't we just use 1 stream of literature? Why do we need a stream of literature at all? Well, one of my objectives and goals in this class, and all my classes, is to show that theory is based upon previous theory. All the articles we read have a section where they explain what their basic ideas, where they came from, so that you're basically showing that you are working in an accepted area for further research. Okay? And you're not really trying to invent something brand new out of nothing. What you're trying to do are take 2 established theories from various different areas and combine them, or synthesize them is what fancy word we use, combine them together to turn into something new. And that way you can show that you've got a well-established theoretical basis from 2 different fields, and that if you can show how they can benefit the research, the literature, by combining them together, no one can argue that this is an appropriate thing to do, because the history, the literature already shows that it is an appropriate place to be. Okay, so that's why we need 2 streams of literature, and then a unique synthesis can provide significant value to the research by establishing a new approach that's built upon established approaches, but you're adding something new to the field. So essentially you're taking 2 streams of literature, synthesizing them together, and when you hit that eureka moment, that aha moment, then you're ready to move on. At that point, you can probably finish writing your prospectus, you'll probably have it approved, and you'll probably be ready to move on to the next phase of the dissertation process. But until you get that aha, you're not going to go any further. Now, a little example of what we're talking about might help here. This is an article written that I use in the strategic management class, and it basically lays out in the abstract what the 2 streams of literature are going to be and how they're going to be connected together. So here the author is taking total quality management theory and general systems theory, and they're going to develop the theoretical basis behind these kind of independently, and then they're going to be combined together to turn into something new. That's the synthesis. And this is Not every research paper is written around this particular approach or this model, but it's well enough established, and we use it for dissertations because if it's well done, nobody can argue that your dissertation is not appropriate, doesn't have value, doesn't have enough rigor. If it's well done, it will be accepted. So the first thing that this author does is has to establish the literature stream. So the first one is general systems theory and organizational studies. So here they bring in the earlier literature from Miller and Boulding that worked in general systems theory area. So he established the foundational, or sometimes called seminal literature. And then he establishes the total quality management literature. And again, brings in the earlier people that propose these ideas and develops the approach that total quality management theory is built around. Now these are independent. These are coming out of totally different fields, but the author thinks by studying both of them and integrating them together that there's something to be said, something to be gained for both of these fields. Okay, so they have the TQM foundation literature. Now defining the gap. Okay, we've got our streams of literature. Now we want to say, is there a way that we can bring these close together? And this table shows side by side the basic areas that the author is proposing that general systems theory, GST, and total quality management theory, TQM, areas where they're very similar. And so the basic areas are the assumptions, the organizational goal, the organizational purposes, the systems model, the management functions, and the systems boundaries. Okay, so here he's saying along these basic categories, these basic dimensions, here's where these two propose their differences. Okay, these are the areas that we want to investigate. So to bridge the gap, he claims that total systems theory actually does, if you break it down, general systems theory and total quality management, if you break it down into these three specific areas, that actually there is an overlap. There is an integration between the two. So for general systems theory, one of the main areas is cybernetics and feedback, process and change and learning. In total quality management, there's customer focus, continuous improvement, and teamwork. Then in each one of the boxes in the grid, the author shows how there's a synthesis, there's a same approach, just looking at it from a different perspective for each of these two basic theories along these dimensions. Okay? So there's the integration between the two streams of literature. So if you look at this from a graphical standpoint, maybe again it kind of makes sense. So the author is starting from two basic areas of literature: total quality management, general systems theory. And then from those areas of literature, he begins to narrow the field down. So he's not interested in everything about total quality management. He's not interested in everything about general systems theory. General systems theory covers solar systems, covers the way ecosystems, it can cover almost anything. But he's only pulling out the information related to higher order human systems, as in organizations. So from here, in total quality management, the focus continues into teamwork, customer focus, and continuous improvement. In general systems theory, it goes towards cybernetics and feedback, learning, and process and change. Okay, so you can see those are both being developed. Now comes the aha. He's going to synthesize these two streams together and build a bridge. And the bridge is going to be made up of his table. Of course, the article goes into explaining more detail how this table links the two things together. It shows that both of these theories, although they're coming from different areas, different fields, actually could be looked at through the same lens. And both, in general systems theory supplements and adds to the concept of total quality management. Okay. So that's the idea. That's where the two streams of literature develop, and the idea during the when you're writing your streams of literature and your literature review, you're bringing them to a point where you can identify why and how they can be combined together. So in summary, doing this is not easy. And if it was, as I said, once you've got this, And if your committee agrees you have a good solid streams of literature and a good gap and a bridge, then you're well on your way. Then you know pretty much what you're going to be doing. And then it's kind of building upon that foundation, putting the next story onto it, the succeeding chapters. So it's not easy. Doing what we're doing in this class, reading the literature and looking at the articles and how the articles are developed, and writing your papers, analyzing those articles, is the way you get skilled at identifying the streams of literature and the integration, the synthesis, and the gaps. In part of what is important, again, is in your writing to begin to develop a clearer definition of what you're trying to do, and what you'll hear over and over again, narrowing down the focus of your work to something that you can actually accomplish. The empirical testing is the final step that shows what the bridge is, what you claim this is the bridge between these two theoretical areas. It can actually bear the weight of the evidence. So at that point you go out and you collect evidence that shows, yes, this bridge that I've proposed between these two theories is actually strong enough, statistically proven enough to show that this is a valid way to look at these two areas, at least you're even now looking at a new area. Okay, so this is the way that we do dissertations, and this is the way that it's important as you're preparing by doing your coursework to start reading the literature and looking for the way these things are developed. So the keys to enjoying your writing assignments, if that is at all possible. Let's take a tip from Calvin of Calvin and Hobbes. I used to hate writing, he says, but now I enjoy them. I realize that the purpose of writing is to inflate weak ideas, obscure poor reasoning, and inhibit clarity. Then with a little practice, writing can be an intimidating and impenetrable fog. Want to see my book report? Hobbes reads the dynamics of inner being and monological imperatives in Dick and Jane, a study in psychic transrelational gender modes. Academia, here I come. Well, unlike Calvin, my job as dissertation chair and advisor to students working on their dissertation is to deflate weak ideas, not inflate them, to clarify poor reasoning, not obscure it, and to force clarity rather than inhibit clarity. And many of my comments on your papers and on the rubrics are exactly intended to do that. So, until next time, enjoy your writing, and goodbye and good luck.